The door slammed behind Georgia as she stumbled into the apartment building, her arms aching under the weight of 3 grocery bags that threatened to split at any second. And she could barely see over the stack of toilet paper she'd panic bought, because every news channel kept saying the world was about to shut down completely. She hadn't expected any of this. 2 weeks ago, she'd been planning a spring break trip to Miami with her college friends, celebrating her last semester before graduation. Now she was stuck in Boston, watching everyone flee campus as the university announced an indefinite closure. Her roommate Sarah had gone home to Connecticut, leaving Georgia alone in their small apartment near Finster Street. Except the landlord had called yesterday with terrible news. A pipe had burst in her building, flooding 3 units including hers. Everything was ruined, and she needed to vacate immediately. Georgia had exactly $73 in her checking account and nowhere to go. Her parents were in Arizona, but flights were being canceled left and right, and honestly, she couldn't afford a ticket anyway. Her part-time job at the campus bookstore had evaporated along with the student body. She'd been on the verge of tears when her friend Jessica called with a lifeline. "My brother's roommate just moved out," Jessica had said. "He's looking for someone to split rent for a few months. It's temporary, just until this whole virus thing blows over. He's super chill, I promise." Georgia hadn't asked many questions. She was desperate. Now, standing in the hallway of a building that was significantly nicer than her flooded apartment, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The address Jessica had given her led to a modern complex with actual security and a lobby that didn't smell like old carpet. She pressed the buzzer for Unit 4B, her heart hammering. The door opened, and Georgia found herself staring at a man who looked nothing like what she'd expected from the word roommate. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark brown hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He wore a gray t-shirt and jeans, both well-fitted, and his jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were a striking hazel, and right now they looked tired. "You must be Georgia," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough. "I'm Harrison Emerson. Come on in." She followed him inside, trying not to gawk at the apartment. It was beautiful, with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and windows that actually let in natural light. The furniture looked expensive but comfortable, all clean lines and neutral colors. The kitchen had granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that gleamed. "Your room's down the hall," Harrison said, gesturing to the left. "Bathrooms shared, sorry about that. There's only one. I'll try to stay out of your way." "Thank you so much for this," Georgia said, setting down her bags. "Jessica said your roommate just left." "Yeah." Harrison's expression darkened slightly. "He had to move back home, family emergency, bad timing all around. I really appreciate you letting me stay." "I can pay my half of rent. I just need a few weeks to find another job, and don't worry about it," Harrison interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "We'll figure it out. Right now, let's just focus on getting through this lockdown thing." Georgia nodded, though something about his casual attitude toward money struck her as odd. Most people their age were scraping by, especially now. But maybe he had savings or parents who helped out. She wasn't going to question her good fortune. "I should warn you," Harrison continued, moving toward the kitchen. "I'm not the greatest roommate. I keep weird hours, I work from home, and I'm not much of a cook. But I'm quiet, I clean up after myself, and I'll respect your space." "Sounds perfect to me," Georgia said honestly. "I'm pretty easy to live with. I promise I'm not going to throw parties or anything." A ghost of a smile crossed Harrison's face. "I don't think anyone's throwing parties right now." He was right about that. Over the next few days, Georgia watched the world transform through news broadcasts and frantic text messages. The city issued a stay-at-home order. Everything non-essential closed. The streets emptied. She'd thought the pipe burst was bad luck, but now she realized it might have been a blessing in disguise. At least here, she had a comfortable place to shelter while the world went insane outside. Harrison was true to his word about being a ghost. He spent most of his time in his room with the door closed. Georgia could hear him on phone calls sometimes, his voice muffled but intense. He worked long hours, often emerging only to grab food or coffee before disappearing again. When they did cross paths in the kitchen or living room, he was polite but distant, making small talk about the weather or the latest news before retreating. Georgia tried to respect his privacy, but she couldn't help being curious. What did he do for work that kept him so busy? And why did someone who clearly could afford this apartment alone need a roommate? She noticed little things. His laptop was top of the line, his watch looked expensive, and the few phone calls she overheard involved terms like investment portfolios and quarterly projections. 2 weeks into quarantine, Georgia was going stir-crazy. She'd organized her room 3 times, deep-cleaned the kitchen, and watched every show on her limited streaming account. She was microwaving leftovers when Harrison emerged from his room, looking more disheveled than usual. "Is that Thai food?" he asked, eyeing her container. "Yeah, from that place on Cambridge Street. I ordered it a few days ago." "Why?" Harrison ran a hand through his hair. "I've been eating nothing but protein bars and instant coffee for 3 days. I forgot what real food looks like." Georgia laughed despite herself. "That's horrible. Are you that busy? You have no idea." He opened the refrigerator, stared at the contents without seeing them, then closed it again. "Everything's a mess right now. I'm trying to manage a crisis that's spiraling in 15 directions at once." "What do you do?" Georgia asked before she could stop herself. Harrison hesitated, and for a moment she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I run a business, hospitality industry. As you can imagine, things are pretty dire." "Oh God," Georgia said sympathetically. "With everything closing, that must be a nightmare." "Nightmare doesn't begin to cover it." Harrison leaned against the counter, and Georgia noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "I've got hundreds of employees wondering if they're going to have jobs, properties sitting empty, investors losing their minds, and I'm trying to figure out how to keep everything from completely falling apart while stuck in my apartment." There was something raw in his voice, a vulnerability that made Georgia's chest tighten. "Have you eaten anything today besides protein bars?" "Coffee," Harrison offered weakly. "That doesn't count." Georgia opened the refrigerator and started pulling out ingredients. "I'm making dinner, real dinner. You're eating it." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." "You're going to make yourself sick, and then I'll be stuck alone in this apartment during a pandemic. Sit down." To her surprise, Harrison actually obeyed, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs. Georgia set about making pasta with vegetables and chicken she found in the freezer. It wasn't fancy, but it was real food, and watching Harrison's shoulders gradually relax as she cooked made her feel useful for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," Harrison said quietly when she set a plate in front of him. "You didn't have to do this." "We're roommates," Georgia said, sitting down with her own plate. "We should look out for each other, especially now." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Harrison asked, "What about you? What do you do when you're not rescuing workaholic roommates from protein bar addiction?" Georgia laughed. "I'm a college student, or I was, senior at Commonwealth University. I was supposed to graduate in May, but who knows what's happening now. Everything's online, which is fine for some classes but terrible for others. And my part-time job disappeared, so I'm basically in limbo." What were you studying? Art history with a minor in museum studies. Completely impractical, according to my parents, but I love it. She spun her fork through the pasta. I had an internship lined up at the Fine Arts Museum for the summer. They called last week to say they're postponing indefinitely. That's rough, Harrison said, and he sounded like he genuinely meant it. What do you want to do eventually? Work in a museum, maybe as a curator or in acquisitions. Help people connect with art and history. I know it sounds silly. It doesn't sound silly at all, Harrison interrupted. The world needs people who care about beautiful things, especially now. Maybe especially now. Georgia looked up, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Their eyes met, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that felt deeper than it should have after 2 weeks of barely interacting. Harrison cleared his throat and looked away. This is really good, by the way, the food. Thanks. Georgia felt her cheeks warm. We should make it a regular thing. Meals, I mean, instead of both of us eating alone in our rooms all the time. Yeah, Harrison said slowly. Yeah, I'd like that. It became their routine. Every evening one of them would cook, and they'd eat together at the small kitchen table. Georgia learned that Harrison took his coffee black, hated broccoli, and had a surprising sweet tooth. Harrison learned that Georgia sang while she cooked, always started her day with green tea, and had strong opinions about Renaissance art. They didn't talk about personal things at first. The conversation stayed surface level safe. But gradually, as the days of quarantine stretched into weeks, the walls started coming down. One night, over homemade tacos, Harrison told her about his business. I started with one property, he said. A bed and breakfast in Vermont that was going under. I bought it, renovated it, and managed to turn a profit. Then I bought another one, and another. Now I own a chain of boutique hotels across New England. Georgia nearly dropped her taco. You own hotels, like multiple hotels. 17 properties, Harrison said quietly. Everything from historic inns to modern boutique hotels, or I did before all this. Now they're all empty. Harrison, that's incredible. You must be, she stopped, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. The expensive apartment. The casual attitude toward rent. The stress of managing a crisis affecting hundreds of employees. You're not just successful, you're wealthy. He met her eyes and she saw something guarded in his expression. Does that change things? I don't know, Georgia said honestly. Why didn't you tell me? Because people act differently when they know. They see the money instead of the person. And right now, when everything's falling apart, it's almost a relief to just be some guy making tacos with his roommate. He set down his fork. Jessica didn't tell you. She said you were her brother's friend who needed a roommate. That's it. I'm not her brother's friend, I am her brother. Georgia blinked. What? Jessica is my half-sister, different fathers. She uses our mother's maiden name, Thompson. I use my father's name, Emerson. We're not particularly close, but she knew I needed someone to split the rent, and she knew you needed a place. He paused. Except I don't actually need to split the rent. I own this building. The words hung in the air between them. Georgia sat back, processing. You own this building. I'm sorry I wasn't up front. I just wanted someone normal around. Someone who wouldn't treat me like a bank account or a business opportunity. His jaw tightened. I've had enough of that to last a lifetime. There was pain in his voice, and Georgia realized they were finally getting to something real. What do you mean? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I was engaged. Up until 3 months ago. Her name was Victoria. We'd been together for 2 years. I thought she was the one, you know. I proposed on Christmas Eve. She said yes. We started planning the wedding. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then she met someone else, someone richer, a tech CEO from Silicon Valley. She left me for him in January. Turns out I wasn't successful enough. Harrison, that's horrible. The worst part is, I should have seen it coming. She always wanted more. More money, more status, more everything. But I loved her, so I convinced myself I was being cynical. Then I overheard her on the phone with her friend, laughing about how she'd traded up. That's what she called it, trading up. Georgia felt anger flare in her chest. She sounds like a terrible person. She was beautiful and charming and ambitious. Everyone thought we were perfect together. My investors loved her. She knew exactly what to say at every event, every dinner. But none of it was real. She didn't love me. She loved what I could give her, and when someone offered more, she left. Harrison met Georgia's eyes. So yeah, I'm a little wary of people knowing about the money. It attracts the wrong attention. I get it, Georgia said softly. But for what it's worth, I don't care about your money. I mean, it's nice that the apartment has hot water and functioning appliances, but you could be broke and I'd still want to have tacos with you. Something in Harrison's expression softened. Yeah, you're a good person, Harrison. You work yourself to exhaustion trying to take care of your employees. You're kind to the delivery drivers even when they get the order wrong. You laugh at my terrible jokes. That's who you are, not your bank account. Thank you, Harrison said quietly. That means more than you know. After that night, something shifted between them. The conversations got deeper, more personal. Georgia told him about her complicated relationship with her parents, who'd wanted her to study something practical and saw her art history degree as a waste. Harrison told her about the pressure of running a business he'd built from nothing, the weight of responsibility for so many people's livelihoods. They started spending more time together outside of meals. They watched movies on the couch, debating the merits of plot versus character development. They played board games that got wildly competitive. Harrison taught Georgia the basics of business strategy. Georgia introduced Harrison to art history podcasts. They took walks around the empty neighborhood in the evenings, maintaining careful distance from the few other people they encountered, and talked about everything from philosophy to favorite childhood memories. Georgia found herself looking forward to seeing him every day. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he really smiled, which was happening more often. She noticed how he listened when she talked, like her words actually mattered. She noticed the way her heart sped up when they accidentally brushed hands reaching for the same coffee mug. She was falling for him. The realization hit her one morning as she watched him make breakfast, his hair still messy from sleep, humming along to the music she'd put on. This wasn't just friendship or roommate bonding. This was something more, something deeper and more dangerous. She tried to talk herself out of it. He was wealthy. She was a broke college student. He was dealing with a broken heart and a business crisis. The last thing he needed was his temporary roommate developing feelings. And besides, in a few months the world would open back up, and they'd both move on with their lives. This was just a moment out of time, a bubble that would inevitably burst. But her heart didn't care about logic. One evening in late April, Harrison emerged from his room looking more devastated than she'd ever seen him. He sank onto the couch, his face in his hands. Harrison, Georgia sat beside him, alarmed. What happened? I had to close 3 properties permanently, he said, his voice muffled. I fought for weeks to avoid it, but the numbers don't work. Even when things reopen, it's going to take years to recover. I had to lay off 60 people today. 60 people who were counting on me, and I failed them. You didn't fail anyone. There's a global pandemic. I should have had better reserves, better contingency plans. I built this whole company, and now I'm watching it crumble. He looked up, and Georgia saw tears in his eyes. These aren't just employees, they're people I know. Maria has 3 kids. Tom is putting his daughter through college. Linda's husband just had surgery, and I had to tell them they don't have jobs anymore. Georgia didn't think. She just pulled him into her arms, holding him as his shoulders shook. He clung to her like she was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart, and she held on just as tightly. "You're a good man," she whispered. "You did everything you could. You can't control a pandemic, but you treated them with dignity and respect, and that matters. That matters so much." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other on the couch. When Harrison finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer. "Thank you," he said, "for being here, for listening, for giving a damn." "Always," Georgia said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Harrison's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. They were so close, his face inches from hers, and Georgia's breath caught. She saw the moment he realized it too, saw something kindle in his eyes that made her heart race. Then he pulled away, standing abruptly. "I should get some sleep. Long day." "Right," Georgia said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course." She lay awake that night, replaying the moment over and over. He'd felt it too, she was sure of it. But he'd pulled away. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe he didn't want to complicate their living situation. Maybe he still wasn't over Victoria. The next few days were awkward. Harrison retreated back into his room, their dinners becoming brief and polite. Georgia tried to give him space, but she missed him desperately. She missed their conversations, their laughter, the easy companionship they'd built. She was reading on the couch when Harrison finally emerged on the third day. He sat down next to her, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been avoiding you, and that's not fair." "It's okay." "No, it's not. You've been nothing but kind to me, and I repaid that by shutting you out." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I'm scared. I'm scared because I'm starting to feel things I didn't think I'd feel again. And the timing is terrible, and the situation is complicated, and I don't want to mess this up." George's heart hammered. "Feel what things?" Harrison turned to look at her, his hazel eyes intense. "I'm falling for you, Georgia. Maybe I've been since you forced me to eat real food and made this apartment feel like a home instead of just a place to hide from the world. You make me laugh. You make me think. You see me, not my money or my business or my potential use to you, just me, and I haven't felt that way in so long." "Harrison," Georgia breathed, "I'm falling for you too. I have been for weeks. I kept trying to talk myself out of it, but I can't. I don't want to." "We should be practical about this," Harrison said, but he was leaning closer. "We're quarantined together. It could just be proximity and stress, and it's not," Georgia interrupted. "I know what this is. I know what I feel." "If we do this," Harrison said slowly, "if we try this and it doesn't work out, we're stuck living together until the world opens back up. That could be months. I know. And you're 22, about to graduate with your whole life ahead of you. I'm 31, dealing with a failing business and a broken heart that I'm still putting back together. The timing is terrible." "I don't care about timing," Georgia said. "I care about you." Harrison's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "I don't have much to offer right now. My company is struggling. My life is a mess. I can't promise you fancy dates or elaborate gestures. I don't want fancy dates. I want you, exactly as you are." "Georgia," she kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. Harrison made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. His hand tangled in her hair, and Georgia felt like every nerve ending was on fire. This was right. This was real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I'm still broken," he whispered. "I don't know how to trust people with my heart anymore." "Then let me show you," Georgia said. "One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations, just us figuring this out together." "I can do that," Harrison said and kissed her again. They took it slow, feeling their way through this new territory. Harrison was hesitant at first, clearly gun-shy from his previous relationship. But Georgia was patient, showing him through actions rather than words that she was there for him, not what he could give her. They had their first official date in the apartment, since nowhere else was open. Harrison cooked an elaborate dinner, nearly burning the chicken in his nervousness, while Georgia set the table with candles and fancy napkins she'd found in a cabinet. They dressed up, Georgia in a sundress she'd brought from her old apartment and Harrison in a button-down shirt that made his eyes stand out. "This is ridiculous," Harrison said, laughing as he poured wine into mugs because neither of them had thought to check if there were wine glasses. "We've been living together for 2 months. We had tacos 3 nights ago in sweatpants." "This is different," Georgia insisted. "This is romantic." "You're right." Harrison raised his mug in a toast. "To the most beautiful woman I've ever known, who somehow sees something worthwhile in a stressed-out hotel owner with a penchant for protein bars." "To the kindest man I've ever met," Georgia countered, "who showed me that money doesn't matter nearly as much as character." They clinked their mugs together, grinning like idiots. As the weeks passed, Georgia watched Harrison slowly come back to life. He smiled more, laughed more, let himself relax. His business was still struggling, but he was finding creative solutions, working with his remaining staff to pivot and adapt. He started a program to house essential workers at reduced rates in his empty properties. He partnered with local organizations to provide temporary shelter for people displaced by the pandemic. The financial returns were minimal, but the impact was real, and Georgia saw the way it lifted some of the weight from his shoulders. "You know what I realized?" Harrison said one night as they lay on the couch, Georgia's head on his chest while they watched the stars through the window. "I built my company to prove something, to show that I could be successful, that I could make it on my own. But I lost sight of why I started in the first place. I wanted to create spaces where people felt welcome and cared for. I wanted to give them experiences they'd remember. Somewhere along the way, it became about the numbers and the growth and impressing people like Victoria. But you reminded me what actually matters." "What's that?" Georgia asked softly. "People. Connection. Making a difference, even a small one. You do that naturally without even thinking about it. You made this apartment feel like home. You made me remember who I wanted to be." Georgia tilted her head up to kiss him. "You were always that person. You just forgot for a while." In May, Georgia's university announced virtual graduation ceremonies. Her parents called, disappointed they couldn't attend in person, and Georgia felt a familiar pang of not quite measuring up to their expectations. Harrison found her crying in her room afterward. "Hey," he said, sitting beside her on the bed. "Talk to me." "It's stupid," Georgia said, wiping her eyes. "I'm graduating with honors. I should be happy, but my parents barely acknowledged it. They're already asking what my plan is when I'm going to get a real job, whether I've reconsidered law school. Like everything I've accomplished doesn't count because it's not what they wanted for me. It's not stupid. Your feelings matter." Harrison pulled her into his arms. "For what it's worth, I'm incredibly proud of you. You finished your degree during a global pandemic while dealing with displacement and financial stress and a surprise roommate. You're brilliant and passionate and dedicated. Any museum would be lucky to have you." "Museums aren't hiring right now," Georgia said glumly. "Nothing's hiring. Maybe not right now, but this won't last forever. And when it ends, you're going to do amazing things. I believe that completely." Georgia held on to him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Good thing you don't have to find out," Harrison said, kissing the top of her head. For her virtual graduation, Harrison threw her a party. just the two of them, but he decorated the apartment with streamers and balloons, made her favorite foods, and even bought her a gift. An antique book about Renaissance art that must have cost a fortune. "Harrison, this is too much," Georgia protested, but she was clutching the book like it was treasure. "Nothing's too much for you," Harrison said simply. "Congratulations, Georgia. You earned this." They danced in the living room to music from Harrison's phone, swaying together as the sun set outside the windows. Georgia felt overwhelmingly happy, this perfect bubble of contentment that she wanted to live in forever. "I love you," Harrison said suddenly, and Georgia's heart stopped. "I know it's fast and the circumstances are weird, but I do. I love you. You brought light back into my life when I thought everything was dark. You made me believe in people again, in love again, and I don't want to hide it anymore." "I love you too," Georgia said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much." They made love for the first time that night, slow and tender and real. Harrison touched her like she was precious, like he couldn't quite believe she was there. Georgia poured everything she felt into every kiss, every caress, showing him without words how much he meant to her. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed, Harrison traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "About Victoria." Georgia went still. "Okay. She called me a few weeks ago. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to worry you. She said things didn't work out with the tech CEO. She wanted to try again, said she'd made a mistake." Harrison's arms tightened around Georgia. "I told her I'd moved on. That I was with someone who actually loved me for who I am, not what I can give her. She got angry, said some nasty things. But I realized something. I wasn't even tempted. Not for a second. Because what I have with you is real in a way that relationship never was." "I'm glad you told me," Georgia said. "And I'm glad you told her no." "There's never been any question," Harrison said. "You're it for me, Georgia Thompson. I know we haven't been together that long, but I've never been more certain of anything." "I'm certain too," Georgia whispered. As summer arrived, the world slowly began to open back up. Restrictions eased. Businesses reopened with new protocols. Harrison's hotels started accepting guests again, though at reduced capacity. Georgia got a job interview at a small gallery, conducted over video call. Life was returning to some version of normal, whatever that meant now. "So," Harrison said one morning over coffee, "we should probably talk about what happens next." Georgia's stomach dropped. This was it. The conversation she'd been dreading. The bubble was bursting. "What do you mean?" "Well, I own this apartment. You were supposed to be a temporary roommate until the quarantine ended, but the quarantine is ending and I don't want you to leave." He set down his coffee mug, his eyes serious. "Move in with me, for real. Not as a roommate, but as my girlfriend, my partner. The person I want to wake up next to every morning." "Really?" George's voice came out embarrassingly squeaky. "Really. I know it's fast. I know people will say we're rushing, but I don't care. I've never been more sure of anything. I love you. I want to build a life with you." "If you want that too." "Yes," Georgia said, launching herself at him. He caught her laughing as she peppered his face with kisses. "Yes, yes, yes, I want that too." Georgia got the gallery job. It was entry-level, barely above minimum wage, but it was in her field and she loved it. Harrison threw himself back into his business with renewed energy, implementing the changes he'd realized mattered during the darkest days of lockdown. He sold off 2 of his struggling properties and used the funds to renovate the others, creating unique experiences that focused on community and connection rather than just luxury. They settled into a rhythm, building a life together. Georgia introduced Harrison to museums and art exhibits when they reopened. Harrison taught Georgia about business and investment, helping her start a small savings account. They learned each other's quirks and habits. the annoying ones and the endearing ones, and chose each other anyway. Every single day, one evening in October, 6 months after their first kiss, Georgia came home from the gallery to find the apartment filled with candles. Harrison stood in the center of the living room dressed in a suit, looking nervous. "Harrison, what's going on?" "I have something to say," Harrison said, and his voice shook slightly. "Actually, I have a question to ask." Georgia's heart started pounding. 7 months ago, you moved in here by accident. You were supposed to be a temporary roommate, a pandemic convenience. But you became everything. You became my best friend, my partner, my home. You showed me what real love looks like. Not love based on what someone can get from you, but love that sees you completely and chooses you anyway. Harrison dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "I know it hasn't been that long. I know people will say we should wait, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Georgia Thompson, will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful, a simple sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Georgia didn't even really see it through her tears. "Yes," she said, pulling him up to kiss him. "Yes, absolutely yes." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. "I love you so much," he said against her lips. "I love you too. I can't believe this is real. Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's real," Harrison promised. "I'm real. This is real. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They got married in the spring, a small ceremony with close friends and family. Jessica was thrilled to officially become George's sister-in-law. Even George's parents seemed to come around when they met Harrison and realized he made their daughter genuinely happy. They exchanged vows in the garden of Harrison's first hotel, the Vermont bed and breakfast where his business had started, promising to love each other through pandemics and prosperity, through struggles and success. "I never thought a burst pipe and a global pandemic would lead me to my soulmate," Georgia said in her vows, making everyone laugh. "But I'm so grateful for every twist of fate that brought me to you. You're my home, Harrison. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." "You saved me," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was drowning, you threw me a lifeline. You reminded me what matters and who I want to be. I promise to spend every day being worthy of your love." They honeymooned in Italy, finally able to travel again. Harrison watched Georgia light up in the museums and galleries, her passion infectious. She'd brought a notebook and filled it with sketches and observations, and Harrison thought he'd never seen anyone more beautiful than his wife losing herself in art. A year after their wedding, Georgia was promoted to assistant curator at a prestigious Boston museum. Harrison's business had recovered and was thriving again, with a new focus on sustainable hospitality and community engagement. They bought a house together, a beautiful old Victorian that needed work but had good bones and a garden where Georgia planted flowers. "Remember when we were stuck in that apartment, thinking the world was ending?" Georgia said one evening, sitting on their porch swing as the sun set. "Best thing that ever happened to me," Harrison said, pulling her close, "getting quarantined with you. The world did kind of end," Georgia mused, "but then it started again. Better. Because of you," Harrison said, "you made everything better." 2 years after that, they welcomed their daughter, Elena. She had Harrison's hazel eyes and Georgia's smile. Harrison cried when he held her for the first time, overcome with gratitude for this life he'd built with the woman he loved. Georgia watched him with their daughter, this strong, successful man who'd been so broken when she met him, now whole and happy. She thought about that first night when she'd stumbled into his apartment with too many grocery bags, not knowing her life was about to change completely. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, catching her watching him. "Just how lucky we are," Georgia said. How a broken pipe and a pandemic and pure chance brought us together. I don't think it was chance, Harrison said, kissing her softly while Alina dozed in his arms. I think it was fate. The universe knew exactly what we both needed. And what was that? Each other, Harrison said simply. Always each other. They built a beautiful life together, full of love and laughter and purpose. Harrison expanded his business thoughtfully, always keeping his values at the center. Georgia worked her way up in the museum world, eventually becoming senior curator. They had another child, a son named Marcus. They traveled and adventured and sometimes just stayed home, the four of them, grateful for the simple joy of being together. And sometimes, when people asked how they met, Georgia would smile and say, "We were quarantined together by accident, but falling in love. That was completely on purpose." Harrison would laugh and pull her close, and they'd share a look that said everything. About broken hearts healed, about finding love in unexpected places, about choosing each other every single day. They'd survived a pandemic, built a life from nothing, and found a love that would last forever. Because some roommates are temporary, some are convenient, but sometimes, if you're very lucky, your accidental roommate becomes your forever home, and that makes all the difference. Years later, when Alina was 7 and Marcus was 5, they asked about the pandemic their parents always referenced. Harrison and Georgia sat them down and told them the story, about a scary time when the world shut down, but also about how something beautiful grew from that darkness. About how their parents met by accident and fell in love on purpose. About how the worst year of Harrison's life turned into the best thing that ever happened to him. "So the virus was good?" Alina asked, confused. "No, sweetheart," Georgia said gently. "The virus was terrible. A lot of people got hurt. A lot of people lost things they loved. But even in darkness you can find light. Even when things seem hopeless, beautiful things can grow. Your daddy and I found each other when we both needed someone most. That's what love does. It finds you when you need it." "And sometimes," Harrison added, ruffling Marcus's hair, "the best things in life come from the unlikeliest places. I never expected a temporary roommate to become my whole world. But she did. Your mom did." The children seemed satisfied with this answer, running off to play. Harrison and Georgia stayed on the couch, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. After all these years, they still fit together perfectly. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Georgia asked. "If my apartment hadn't flooded, if Jessica hadn't called, if you'd found a different roommate?" "Never," Harrison said firmly, "because I don't believe in those other timelines. I believe we were always meant to find each other one way or another. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe it would have happened differently, but it would have happened. You're my person, Georgia. In any universe, in any timeline, I'd find you." "That's very romantic," Georgia said, smiling against his shirt. "I learned from the best," Harrison said, kissing the top of her head. "You taught me how to open my heart again, how to trust again, how to love without fear." "You taught me that I'm worth loving exactly as I am," Georgia countered, "that I don't have to change or be someone I'm not, that my passions and dreams matter." "They do matter. You matter. More than anything." It was a simple moment, nothing special. Just a Tuesday evening in their home, their children playing in the next room, the two of them wrapped up in each other the way they'd been since those early quarantine days. But it was everything. It was the life they'd chosen, the love they'd built, the family they'd created. Georgia thought about the girl she'd been, scrambling to find a place to live during a pandemic, scared and alone and uncertain about everything. She thought about the man Harrison had been, nursing a broken heart and trying to keep his world from falling apart. They'd both been lost in their own ways, but they'd found each other. And in finding each other, they'd found themselves. "I love you," Georgia said, the words as easy and natural as breathing. She said them every day, sometimes multiple times, and they never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Harrison said, the same way he'd said it hundreds of times before, thousands of times, each one sincere and true. "Forever." "Forever," Georgia agreed, and she meant it. Through everything that life would bring, the challenges and triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments, they would face it together. Two people who'd been accidentally quarantined together and discovered something neither of them had been looking for. A love that would last a lifetime. That broken pipe had been a blessing. The pandemic, for all its tragedy, had given them each other. And while neither of them would wish for those circumstances again, they were grateful for the outcome. Because sometimes the universe knows what you need before you do. Sometimes it pushes you exactly where you're supposed to be, even if the path there is difficult. Harrison's hotels continued to thrive, now with a reputation for genuine hospitality and community involvement. Georgia became known in the art world for her innovative exhibits and her ability to make art accessible to everyone, not just the elite. They raised their children with love and values, teaching them about resilience and kindness and the importance of seeing people for who they really are. And every year on the anniversary of the day Georgia moved in, they celebrated. Not their wedding anniversary, though that was important too. But the day they met, the day their lives changed forever, the day that set everything else in motion. They'd order takeout, light candles, and sit on the couch together, remembering those uncertain early days. "Best roommate I ever had," Harrison would say. "Best accidental decision I ever made," Georgia would reply. And they'd laugh and kiss and be grateful for broken pipes and global pandemics, and the strange ways that fate works. Because they'd been given something precious. A second chance at love, at happiness, at life itself. And they never took it for granted, not for a single day. Their love story wasn't conventional. It didn't follow the expected path. But it was theirs, built on honesty and trust and choosing each other every single day. And that made it perfect. As the sun set on another beautiful day, another piece of the life they'd built together, Harrison held Georgia close and thought about how lucky he was. He'd lost everything and found everything in the same year. He'd been broken and been healed. He'd given up on love and found it in the most unexpected place. Georgia felt the same gratitude, the same wonder that this was her life. She'd graduated into a pandemic, lost her home, and thought everything was falling apart. But really, everything had been falling into place, leading her exactly where she needed to be, to him, to this, to home, because that's what Harrison was, her home, not the building or the apartment or even the beautiful house they now shared. Him. His arms around her, his heartbeat under her ear, his steady presence in her life. He was home and she was his, and they lived happily ever after, in the truest sense of those words. Not without challenges or struggles, because life always brings those. But with love as their foundation, with each other as their anchor, they weathered everything together. And they wouldn't have changed a single thing about their journey because every step had led them here, to forever, to each other, to home.